We have breaking news here with a Ukrainian counterattack in the Bakhmut environs. This is taking place in three separate directions, and there's a lot to unpack here. We have Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin that's having a little bit of a freak out. We have our typical Russian channels that we get information from the Russian side from are freaking out. Some are in denial, and we also have some interesting information from the Russian Ministry of Defense that we're going to look at real quick. First, let's go ahead and dive right in and look at what's going on inside of the Ukrainian counterattack. So first, we're going to go talk about the southern flank. We actually did get to cover this in the video from earlier today, but we now have confirmation that the Ukrainian army has crossed the canal and is battling Russian forces on the other side in these areas right here. So very interesting bit of information. They probably used the rapid bridge assembly equipment that was sent to them from NATO countries. So the Ukrainians are pushing in this direction, as well as at the same time launching an attack from the directions of Chasiv Yar and Ivanivsky on the other side of this flank. So looking at it from this angle, you have Ukrainian attacks both from this direction and this direction, trying to squeeze the Russian units out of this zone and this pocket right here. So the goal here would be to completely reduce this and send all these Russian troops back to their defensive positions around Klishchiivka, which is, a heavily fortified location. This is where it would probably start to get really tough for the Ukrainians. But I would argue that this is probably the maximum goal of this, at least for now. I don't think that this, which of course I'm wrong all the time, but just the beginning of this counterattack, I think the goal here, the primary goal, is to free up the T-0405 highway here in Ivanivsky and allow the Ukrainians to use that for supply again, which it seems like that is what's going on. So now moving to the northern part and looking at what's going on here, you have some overlap where the Ukrainians has retaken some of this ground that the Russians have occupied for several months, including this trench system, which the Russians were making a big deal over capturing and closing in on the T-0506 road a couple weeks back. So the Ukrainians have actually recaptured a lot of territory there, including some trench lines that it seems like Russia captured in the last few days. So I know earlier I had a video update where I said the Russians had actually taken ground in this area. That ground is right here in this small little corner. That's where the ground was captured, and perhaps some areas here as well, where the Ukrainian counterattack is moved in, capturing this area, and then is rapidly moving up the rail line in the direction of Yegidny and Berkivka. So looking at the overhaul map and what this does for the Ukrainians, we're going to zoom out here. This frees up the Ukrainians to use both of the roadways entering into Bakhmut once again. So at many different times over the last couple of months, either one or both of these roads has been very difficult for the Ukrainians to use. And they've had to resort to taking paths through the fields or using dirt roads or mud roads. Now, at this point, they have two paved roads leading into Bakhmut, and they have started building a buffer on both sides to give themselves some room and get supplies and material into the city. So this probably has bought Ukraine several weeks inside of Bakhmut, should they choose. Now, keep in mind, Russia is making advances in town, as we reported in the other video earlier today, so that's something to keep in mind. In terms of like where this information came from, if people are curious about the validity of it, this actually came from Rybar, which is, very pro-Russian source. It's probably Russian intelligence. And I think that's probably pretty accurate because you have a Russian source reporting on Russian territorial losses. So, the Russian side, whether it's Rybar or your typical Russian military bloggers, they're pretty slow to admit losses sometimes, especially in territory. And typically when something like this happens, we saw it in the Kherson and the Kharkov offensives. They go through a couple hours of denial, and it's similar to the Ukrainian side. It's all part of. I mean, they're all playing an information game. That's why I have a job doing this channel, because I'm trying to decipher all that for you guys. But it seems like right now, at the moment, these pro-Russian sources probably aren't the most reliable to get information from, because the situation does appear to be very bad. You have Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner mercenaries inside of Bakhmut, is basically begging for assistance. And this is, I mean, the line that he said is that Wagner is under severe threat of getting encircled inside of Bakhmut, which I don't think is the case. I think he's just being very dramatic to get more rapid assistance and provoke the Russian government into acting much quicker in this situation. But it does seem like the situation is pretty bad for the Russians right now. The Ukrainians have made some very rapid, very successful gains, likely at lower amounts of losses than the Russians would generally claim. And these, like, if Ukraine had been counterattacking for several days and gained this kind of territory, I might be inclined to believe the Russian side if they're saying that Ukrainians were suffering pretty heavy casualties. But this is taking place over the course of a couple hours, and seems by all means a surprise attack by the Ukrainian side, which they have built up forces in the area for this reason. So we've seen a little bit of footage come in from the area so far, but not a lot. So hopefully more of that comes in over the next couple of days. Real quick, we're going to look at the Russian MOD statement that has come up. I'm going to go ahead and just bring it over so I don't have to edit this later. The statements spread by individual Telegram channels about defense breakthroughs in various sections of the line of contact are not true. So this is pretty interesting, and I think this is a bit of denial on part of the MOD. We saw a very similar thing during the Kharkov counteroffensive. The Russian Ministry of Defense didn't even talk about territorial losses for several days. And a lot of people at the time were saying it was a big credibility hit for them. So I think, this could be similar depending on how this Ukrainian counterattack carries out. But as of 2200 on 11th of May, in the Kupiansk direction, there are no active operations. The Zapad group of forces suppressed the actions of 3 enemy sabotage groups. In Krasny Liman direction, another group of forces repulsed 2 attacks by enemy company tactical groups close to the Kremenna Chervanaya Debrova. In Donetsk front, 3 enemy reconnaissance attempts were thwarted, and 8 attacks by the AFU against Russian positions were successfully repelled. Assault units continue to liberate the western part of Artyomsk with air and artillery support. Units of the Yug group forces are actively engaged in blocking Avdiivka and capturing Marinka. The battle is currently underway to repel the attack by the AFU unit in the direction of Malo Ilyanovka. That is the northern flank of Bakhmut. I don't know why they're calling it Malo Ilyanovka, because there's so many other towns to name in the area, and that one's not even mapped. But whatever. I think it's a micro district of Bakhmut in that rail line direction. Army and ground assault aviation as well as artillery are in combat. The enemy suffers significant losses in manpower and hardware. In Zaporozhye and Kherson direction, there are no operations. The general situation area of special military operation is under control. So basically, we have word of 3 separate directions of a Ukrainian counterattack in the area of Bakhmut, and the Russian Ministry of Defense releases this long statement talking about 90% of the statement is talking about completely irrelevant sections of the battlefield where they're probably probing attacks. Maybe there were strong Ukrainian attacks to distract the Russians and draw in forces to those areas. But they have just the one statement where here in the middle where they don't even admit to any losses in the area of Bakhmut, where, we have Rybar, which is clearly saying that the Ukrainians are advancing, and we have, some video footage that kind of shows that. So, um, Russian Ministry of Defense is also a very terrible source of information. All right, guys, that is it for me on this one. I will keep you updated on the situation over the next couple hours if Ukraine continues to make gains or if the Russians are able to counterattack and roll back their, roll back to their previous positions. So we'll keep you up to date either way. Thanks for joining, and until next time.